At 28, I thought I had found the love that would change everything. But when I opened the door to his apartment and saw him with someone else, my world fell apart. I'm Ethan, and this is a story of betrayal, fighting for myself, and unexpected hope that appeared where I least expected it. My name is Ethan, I'm 28, and I live in Chicago, a city where the wind cuts through you like a knife and dreams sometimes feel just as cold. I'm a graphic designer, working at a small studio in the heart of the West Loop, where the hum of computers and the chatter of my coworkers fill the days. It's a decent gig, pays the bills, keeps me busy, but it's not exactly where I thought I'd be at this age. Growing up, I had big plans: move to the city, make a name for myself, live a life that felt true. But the truth is, I've spent most of my years hiding who I really am, and it weighs on me more than I'd like to admit. My family lives out in the suburbs, in a quiet little town where the houses all look the same and the church steeple looms over everything. They're good people, I guess, hardworking, devout, the kind who'd give you the shirt off their back if you needed it. But they've got a narrow view of the world, one shaped by sermons and Sunday potlucks. To them, being gay isn't just a sin, it's a choice you can pray away, a mistake you can fix if you try hard enough. I learned that the hard way when I was 16, after my mom caught me staring a little too long at a boy from school. She didn't say much, just handed me a Bible and told me to read Romans 1. I never brought it up again, and neither did they. Since then, I've kept that part of me locked away from them, a secret I carry like a stone in my chest. Here in the city, it's different. Chicago's alive, gritty, loud, full of people who don't care who you love as long as you keep up with the pace. But even here, I'm careful. At work, I dodge questions about my weekends, laugh off the teasing about why I'm still single. Too busy, I say, flashing a grin that doesn't quite reach my eyes. The truth is, I've never felt safe enough to be open, not with my colleagues, not with the guys I've dated in secret over the years. It's easier to stay quiet, to blend in, to let the world assume I'm just another straight guy chasing deadlines and craft beer. That all changed one night last fall. It was a Thursday, the kind of gray, dreary day that makes you want to crawl under a blanket and forget the world. I just wrapped up a brutal project, hours of tweaking fonts and colors for a client who couldn't make up their mind, and my head was pounding. I didn't feel like going home to my empty apartment, so I wandered into a bar a few blocks from the studio. It was one of those cozy, dimly lit places with exposed brick walls and a jukebox humming in the corner. I slid onto a stool, ordered a whiskey, and let the warmth of it settle into my bones. That's when I met Kyle. He was behind the bar, pouring drinks with an easy confidence that caught my eye right away. Early 30s, I'd guess, with dark hair that fell just above his shoulders and a smile that could light up the room. He had this rugged charm, broad shoulders, a little scruff on his jaw, hands that looked like they'd seen some real work. "Rough day?" he asked, sliding my drink across the counter. His voice was deep, smooth, like it could melt the tension right out of me. I nodded, managing a half-smile. "You could say that." He leaned in a little, resting his elbows on the bar. "Well, you're in good hands now. I'm Kyle." There was a spark in his eyes, a playful glint that made my stomach flip. We got to talking, nothing heavy, just small stuff at first. He teased me about my tie, said it looked like I'd tied it in the dark. I laughed, surprised at how easy it felt to banter with him. Hours slipped by, the bar emptying out around us, until it was just me, him, and the soft croon of some old Springsteen song on the jukebox. When he locked up, he asked if I wanted to walk with him for a bit. I said yes without thinking. We ended up wandering along the riverfront, the city lights shimmering on the water. The air was crisp, but I didn't feel the cold, not with him next to me. He told me he'd been tending bar for years, that he liked the chaos of it, the way every night was different. I told him about my job, how I loved designing but hated the clients sometimes. It was simple, unguarded, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I had to hide. When he brushed his hand against mine, just for a second, I didn't pull away. And when he smiled at me under the glow of a street lamp, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who could see the real me. After that night by the river, Kyle became a fixture in my life, a bright spot in the gray blur of Chicago's autumn days. It started small, a text the next morning, just as simple. "Hey, you free tonight?" I was, of course. We met up at a hole-in-the-wall diner near his bar, splitting a plate of greasy fries and talking until the waitress started giving us the side-eye to leave. He had this way of making everything feel effortless. His laugh, the way he nudged my foot under the table, the stories he'd tell about the characters who stumbled into his bar. I'd never met anyone like him, someone who could pull me out of my head and into the moment. Soon, we were seeing each other all the time. He'd call me after his shifts, voice tired but warm, and I'd meet him under the neon glow of the bar's sign. We'd walk the city at night, tracing paths along the lakefront, or ducking into quiet alleys where the wind couldn't reach us. One evening, he grabbed my hand as we crossed Michigan Avenue, his fingers lacing through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. My heart raced, but I didn't let go, not even when a group of guys shouted something crude from across the street. Carl just squeezed my hand tighter, flashed them a look, and kept walking. With him, I felt braver than I ever had. Weekends were the best. He'd invite me to his place, a cramped one-bedroom in Logan Square with mismatched furniture, and a tiny kitchen that smelled like coffee and spices. He loved to cook, and he'd whip up these incredible breakfasts, fluffy pancakes with syrup he'd warm on the stove, or eggs scrambled with herbs he'd grown on his windowsill. I'd sit on his counter, watching him move with that same easy confidence he had behind the bar, and I'd think, this is what happiness feels like. One morning, he caught me staring and grinned. "What's that look for, Ethan?" I blushed, mumbling something about the food, but really it was him, everything about him. For the first time, I let myself believe this could be real. I'd dated before, furtive hookups, guys I'd meet through apps and never call back, but this was different. Carl wasn't just a fling, he was someone I could imagine a future with. I'd catch myself daydreaming at work, sketching little doodles of us on napkins, him pouring drinks, me sketching at a table nearby. But whenever I tried to bring up what we were, where this was going, he'd deflect. "Why overthink it?" he'd say, pulling me into a kiss that made my questions melt away. "We're good right now, aren't we?" And we were. I couldn't argue with that, so I let it slide, telling myself I was being paranoid. But there were moments that nagged at me. He'd get these late-night texts he wouldn't explain, brushing them off as work stuff, even though the bar was closed. Sometimes he'd cancel plans last minute, saying he was tired or had to cover a shift, and I'd hear a strain in his voice that didn't match his usual calm. I'd ask if something was wrong, and he'd flash that smile, say, "Nah, just life," and change the subject. I wanted to trust him, God, I did, but doubt started creeping in, a quiet whisper I couldn't shake. At work, things shifted too. My coworkers noticed I was different, lighter, happier, and the teasing ramped up. "You've got that glow, man," my friend Sam said one day over lunch, waggling his eyebrows. "Who's the lucky girl?" I forced a laugh, dodging the question, but others weren't so subtle. One afternoon, I overheard a couple of guys in the break room, guys I'd always gotten along with, muttering about me. "He's been weird lately," one said. "You think he's, you know?" The other snickered. "Wouldn't surprise me. Always seemed off." My stomach twisted, but I didn't confront them. I just kept my head down, pretending I hadn't heard. Kyle was my escape from all that. When I told him about it one night, sprawled on his couch with a beer in hand, he pulled me close. "Screw 'em," he said, his arm heavy around my shoulders. "They don't get to decide who you are." His words felt like a lifeline, and I clung to them. With him, I didn't have to explain myself or apologize for existing. He made me feel seen, wanted, like I could finally breathe after years of holding my breath. One night, about 2 months in, we were lying in his bed, the city humming outside his window. The sheets were tangled around us, his head resting on my chest, and I felt this ache, not pain, but something deeper, something I couldn't name. "Kyle," I said softly, tracing circles on his back. "What are we doing here? Like, really?" He went still for a second, then propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at me. His eyes were warm, but there was a flicker of something else, guarded maybe. "We're living, Ethan," he said, brushing a strand of hair off my forehead. "Isn't that enough?" I wanted to push, to ask for more, but he leaned down and kissed me, slow and deep, and I let it go. For now, it was enough. I told myself the cracks I saw were just shadows, tricks of the light. I had no idea how wrong I was. The air was heavy with rain that Friday night, the kind of Chicago downpour that soaks you through in seconds and leaves the streets glistening under sodium lights. I'd had a long week, endless revisions at work, a headache that wouldn't quit, but I was buzzing with a quiet excitement. Kyle had been distant lately, canceling plans with vague excuses about extra shifts, and I missed him. So I decided to surprise him. I stopped by a Thai place he loved, grabbed takeout, pad Thai for him, curry for me, and headed to his apartment in Logan Square. He'd given me a key a few weeks back, a small gesture that felt huge at the time, like a promise we hadn't put into words. I figured he'd be home by now, winding down after the bar closed. I climbed the narrow stairs to his place, the plastic bag swinging against my leg, my shoes squeaking on the wet floor. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and someone's burnt dinner, but I barely noticed. I was too caught up in the thought of seeing him, of stealing a quiet night together. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. "Kyle?" I called, stepping inside. The living room was dim, lit only by a lamp in the corner, and I heard voices, low, warm, laughing. My stomach flipped, but I told myself it was nothing, maybe a friend crashing on his couch. Then I saw them. Kyle was on the sofa, his back to me, his arm draped around someone, a guy I didn't recognize, lean and blonde, his head tilted close to Kyle's. They were sharing a beer, the bottle passing between them, and the way Kyle's hand rested on the guy's thigh made my chest tighten. I froze, the takeout slipping from my grip. It hit the floor with a dull thud, spilling curry across the hardwood, and they both turned. Kyle's eyes widened, a flash of shock crossing his face before it settled into something blank. "Ethan," he said, standing up fast, like he could rewind the moment. The other guy just smirked, leaning back like he owned the place. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, my heart hammering so hard I thought it'd break my ribs. What is this?" I managed, my voice cracking. Kyle took a step toward me, hands raised like he was calming a spooked animal. "Ethan, listen, it's not, don't." I cut him off, stepping back. "Don't lie to me." The room spun, the walls pressing in, and all I could see was that smirk, that hand, the way Kyle wouldn't meet my eyes. I turned and bolted, the door slamming behind me as I stumbled down the stairs, rain hitting my face like needles. I don't know how I got home. The next thing I remember is sitting on my bathroom floor, soaking wet, staring at my phone as it buzzed with his calls. 5 missed, then 6, then a text. "Can we talk?" "I messed up." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the tiles, because messed up didn't cover it. He'd ripped my heart out, and I'd been too blind to see it coming. I turned the phone off, curled into myself, and let the tears come. They burned, hot and angry, mixing with the rain still dripping from my hair. The next day, I couldn't face work. I called in sick, my voice hollow, and spent hours replaying every moment with Kyle, every laugh, every touch, every time I'd ignored the signs. I felt like a fool. But the worst was yet to come. Desperate for someone to lean on, I called my sister, Emily. She'd always been the softer one in our family, the one I thought might understand. I told her everything, Kyle, the betrayal, how I'd loved him. There was a long silence on the line, then her voice, cold and clipped. "Maybe this is God telling you to change, Ethan. This isn't who you're supposed to be." I hung up, stunned, her words slicing deeper than Kyle's betrayal. I tried my mom next. She picked up, but when I said, "I'm gay, Mom, and I just got my heart broken," she didn't respond. I heard her breathing, then a quiet, "I can't deal with this right now," before the line went dead. My dad texted later, "You're not our son anymore. Don't call." It was like a punch to the gut. I'd spent years hiding from them, hoping they'd love me if they ever knew, but in one day, I lost them too. The people who'd raised me, who'd cheered at my little league games and framed my art projects, turned their backs like I was a stranger. Alone in my apartment, the silence was deafening. The city outside kept moving, cars honking, trains rumbling, but I was stuck, drowning in shame and grief. I'd built my world around Kyle, around the hope of us, and now it was gone. Worse, I dared to think I could be myself, and the world, my family, my love, had punished me for it. I didn't know how to keep going, didn't know if I wanted to. All I knew was that I'd never felt so broken, so utterly alone, and I wasn't sure there was a way back from this. The days after Kyle's betrayal blurred into a gray haze. I barely left my apartment, letting the dishes pile up in the sink and the curtains stay drawn against Chicago's relentless winter light. Work got a half-hearted email about personal time, and I ignored the calls from my boss that followed. My phone sat silent now, no more text from Kyle after I blocked him, no word from my family since my dad's final message. The quiet was suffocating, but it matched the emptiness inside me. I'd lost everything that mattered: love, family, the fragile hope I'd clung to, and I didn't know who I was without them. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in Kyle's apartment, the laughter, the stranger's smirk, the way Kyle's excuses fell flat. Then came my sister's voice, sharp and cold. "Change, Ethan." My parents' rejection echoed louder, a chorus of shame that drowned out any fight I had left. I stopped eating much, surviving on coffee and the occasional granola bar, my reflection in the mirror growing gaunt and unfamiliar. I wasn't just grieving Kyle, I was grieving the version of myself I dared to become with him, open, hopeful, alive. One morning, maybe a week later, I couldn't stand the walls anymore. I needed air, something to shake the numbness, so I grabbed my coat and wandered out. The wind bit at my face as I shuffled through the snow-dusted streets, no real destination in mind. I ended up at a small library in Wicker Park, a squat brick building I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, it was warm and hushed, the smell of old paper and dust a strange comfort. I drifted to a corner with a worn armchair, pulled a random book off the shelf, some poetry collection, and sank into it, pretending to read. That's when I met Owen. He appeared quietly, a lanky guy in his mid-30s with glasses perched on his nose and a stack of books under his arm. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, nodding at the chair across from me. His voice was soft, steady, like he wasn't here to bother anyone. I shrugged, too tired to care, and he settled in, flipping through a novel. After a while, he glanced up. "You okay? You look like you've been through it." I bristled, ready to snap, but his eyes, warm, brown, unguarded, stopped me. There was no pity there, just a quiet curiosity. "Not really," I muttered, surprised I'd answered at all. He nodded, like that was enough, and went back to his book. But a few minutes later he spoke again. "Coffee helps, you know. There's a place across the street, my treat if you're up for it." I don't know why I said yes, maybe I was too exhausted to say no, but soon we were sitting in a cramped cafe, steam curling from our mugs. Owen was a librarian, he told me, with a dry humor and a way of listening that made you feel heard. I didn't plan to spill my guts, but it came out anyway: Kyle, the betrayal, my family's rejection. He didn't flinch, just sipped his coffee and let me talk. "I've been there," he said when I finished, his voice low. "Not the exact same, but close. My ex cheated too, and my folks kicked me out when I came out at 19. Took me years to stop hating myself for it." I stared at him, this stranger who'd just laid his own wounds bare like it was nothing. "How'd you get past it?" I asked. He smiled, small but real. "You don't get past it all at once. You just keep going, one step at a time. And you figure out who you are without their rules." That coffee turned into more. We started meeting up: libraries, cafes, walks along the frozen lakefront. Owen was different from Kyle, less flashy, more grounded, with a kindness that didn't demand anything back. He'd bring me books he thought I'd like, little collections of essays or queer poetry, and we'd talk about them over cheap diner food. He never pushed, but he had this way of asking questions. "What do you want, Ethan?" Or, "What makes you happy?" That forced me to think. Slowly, I started to see myself again, not as the broken mess Kyle left behind, but as someone who could still build something new. It wasn't easy. There were days I'd snap at Owen for no reason, days I'd shut down, convinced I didn't deserve his patience. The world outside didn't help: snide comments from coworkers who'd caught wind of my drama, the silence from my family that felt like a fresh cut every time I checked my phone. But Owen stayed, steady as the lake ice, showing me what it looked like to live unapologetically. He'd been out for years, he said, and yeah, it cost him, but it gave him freedom too. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he told me once, his hand brushing mine across the table. You're enough. Bit by bit, I started to believe him. I went back to work, faced the whispers with a blank stare, and picked up my sketchpad again. I drew things I'd never dared before: 2 men holding hands, a self-portrait with a quiet pride in my eyes. With Owen, I felt safe to be messy, to be real. He wasn't a fix for my pain, but he was a mirror, reflecting back a strength I'd forgotten I had. For the first time, I wondered if I could fight for myself, not to win anyone back, but to claim the life I deserved. Spring crept into Chicago like a hesitant guest, thawing the ice along the lake and coaxing green from the city's gray edges. It had been months since that night at Kyle's, months since my family turned their backs, and I was still standing, shaky, scarred, but standing. Owen had become my anchor, not in some grand, romantic way, but as a steady presence I hadn't known I needed. We built a rhythm: coffee runs, late-night talks, quiet afternoons in the library where he worked. He didn't fix me, he just gave me space to fix myself, and that was more than I'd ever had. One evening, I ran into Kyle again. I was at a bar in Andersonville with Owen, laughing over some dumb story about a patron who'd spilled an entire tray of books. The place was packed, all warm lights and clinking glasses, when I saw him, leaning against the counter, alone, a half-empty beer in his hand. He looked different, tired, his shoulders slumped, the cocky charm I'd once loved nowhere in sight. Our eyes met, and for a second I froze, the old ache flaring up like a phantom limb. He started toward me, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he had the right. "Ethan," he said, voice rough. "Can we talk?" I glanced at Owen, who gave me a small nod. "Your call," and I stepped aside with Kyle. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes on the floor. "I screwed up. I know that. I miss you." His words hit me, but not like they used to. They didn't pull me in, they just hung there, hollow. "You didn't miss me when you were with him," I said, and he flinched. "I was an idiot," he muttered. "I thought I could have it all, and I lost you instead." I waited for the anger, the tears, but they didn't come. I just felt done. "Yeah, you did," I said, and walked away. He didn't follow. Back at the table, Owen raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" I nodded, a weight lifting I hadn't known I was carrying. "Yeah. I think I am." Kyle got what he deserved, not some dramatic punishment, but the quiet consequence of his choices: loneliness, regret, a life without the trust he'd broken. I didn't need revenge, I needed to let go, and I finally had. My family was another story. I'd sent my mom a letter a while back, not begging, just explaining who I was, hoping she'd soften. She never replied. Emily called once, voice tight, saying, "We're praying for you." Like I was a lost cause. My dad's silence was loudest of all. It hurt, still does, but I stopped waiting for them to change. Owen taught me that, how to mourn what I'd lost without letting it define me. "They might come around," he said once, "but you don't need them to be whole." He was right. I'd spent years chasing their approval, bending myself to fit their rules, but I was done shrinking. That spring, I started living louder. I came out at work, not with a speech, just casually mentioning Owen in a break room chat. Sam grinned, slapped my shoulder, said, "About time, man." The guys who'd whispered before went quiet, their judgment irrelevant now. I poured myself into my art again, sketching designs that felt raw and true: 2 men laughing by the lake, a self-portrait with steady eyes. A local gallery even picked up a few pieces, and seeing my name on the wall, unapologetic, felt like a victory. Owen and I weren't a couple, not yet, maybe not ever, but we were something. Friends, confidants, 2 people who'd survived and found each other on the other side. One night, we stood on the Lake Michigan shore, the water lapping at the rocks, the skyline glowing gold against the dusk. The wind was sharp, but I didn't mind. It felt alive, like it was carrying away the last of my fear. "What now?" Owen asked, his voice soft over the waves. I thought about it, about Kyle's empty apologies, my family's closed doors, the man I was becoming. "I keep going," I said. "I live." He smiled, that small, real smile I'd come to count on, and we stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the city breathe. I didn't have all the answers. Where Owen and I would end up, if my family would ever bend, but I had something better, myself. For the first time, I wasn't hiding, wasn't running. I was here, open, flawed, and free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a quiet peace settle in. The world hadn't changed. It was still messy, still harsh for people like me, but I'd fought through betrayal, through rejection, and found a strength I didn't know I had. Kyle's lies had broken me, my family's judgment had cut deep, but they didn't get the last word. I did. And that night, with the wind in my hair and Owen beside me, I knew I was worth loving, not despite who I was, but because of it. Whatever came next, I'd face it head on, not as someone's secret or someone's shame, but as Ethan, whole, real, and finally home.